My mom always told us to be in the house by 2 a.m. because that's when the dead do their traveling to visit loved ones and friends. But anyways, I'm from South Dakota. When I was younger, I used to get in a lot of trouble. So growing up, I was in juvenile detention centers, or other times I was in some treatment centers. I remember a girl that I became friends with there. She told me something that happened to her. It's from her local res. I believe it was Rosebud, which if you didn't know, a lot of scary shit happens on the Rosebud res. And I remember what she told me scared me, so I'm gonna share it with you all. By the way, Rosebud res is right next to Pine Ridge res. Another one where a lot of scary stuff happens. Let's call her Anna. Anna and her sister live with their grandmother in Rosebud. A lot of parts of South Dakota is mostly cornfields and plains. She said they went to a party, and it went late into the night. It was going on about 2 or 3 in the morning. And at the end of the party, the only few people who drove were too drunk to drive anybody home. And so the girls were only about a mile away from their grandmother's house. Since they had each other, and they were familiar with the area, Anna said that they chose to just walk home. So they began walking down the road that led to their grandmother's house. It was just about a mile away. As the light from the bonfire from the party faded the further they walked, the only light that they had was the light from the half moon. Anna said that when they got about a quarter of the way there was a cornfield by the side of the road. There happened to be a ditch about 15 feet between them and the cornfield. Then, they began to hear a rustling sound in the cornfield, and it creeped them out a bit, but she said they assumed it was just the wind. They continued walking, picking up their pace a little bit because they had gotten a bit freaked out. The noise continued in the field, maybe about 10 paces beside them. At some point it got a little bit louder, turning more into a trashing sound. It almost sounded like somebody was struggling to move, or maybe walk. That's how she described it. Anna said they continued walking, coming to a wooden fence post that marked about the halfway point of their walk home. Just as they neared the post, that's when they heard a cry and a whimper that was coming from the cornfield. It sounded like that of a wounded animal, maybe a dog, a raccoon, or something. However, it was whimpering like a dog does. Anna said that at this point, she had picked up her pace, and even the buzz from the alcohol that she had drank was starting to wear off. However, her sister, who was around 16, had a very soft heart, especially for animals. Her sister was like, "I think it might be a dog that's hurt. I think we should go see. We might be able to help it." Anna said that she looked at her sister like, "Are you crazy?" That's when the whimpering came again, and they both looked towards the dark cornfield, and they could see where the whimpering was coming from. They walked a bit towards it. They were a few feet away from the ditch. They heard the whimpering coming again from the cornfield across. And now they could even see something moving in the cornfield. It was about 20 feet from where they stood. They stepped into the thick grass, and they began to go into the ditch. As they got near the cornfield, the whimpering got softer. They got to the edge of the cornfield, and just as the younger sister got to it, the whimpering changed. Then, from the cornfield, Anna said that they both saw a rotting human hand come out through the thick underbrush, just a few inches from their feet. They were frozen, watching the hand become a full arm, stretching out from the field below them. They both began backing up. Anna said that the arm gripped the dirt, and that's when she saw a torso come out as well, rotting and decaying. However, there was no head, just the body. Then, with a dragging sound, some cackling started coming out from it. The pair of arms dragged the torso from the field. It had no fucking legs. Anna said that they were finally able to turn around and run. They ran as fast as they could, but at the same time, they could hear the sound of whatever this thing was, dragging itself behind them, like the sound of a bag of flour being dragged across the dirt. Anna said that they didn't even look back. They were terrified. And that's when her sister, she tripped and fell. Anna right away stopped to help her sister up. She said at the pace they were running, this thing should have been yards behind them. But somehow, it was right there, just like 6 feet away. How could it move so fast? She reached down and grabbed her sister, helping her get up just before this thing grabbed her. Finally, after running for what felt like forever, they saw a small light in the distance just ahead. It was Grandma's porch light. Anna said that she could hear this thing was still right behind them. But they were able to get to the porch and burst through the front door, screaming for Grandma. They slammed the door shut and locked it. Grandma then came from her bedroom in her nightgown. "What's going on?" she asked. That's when the cackling started outside. Grandma's face dropped. She had also heard it. Then came the clawing and the banging sounds, the sound of its nails on the door. It was trying to come in at this point. Anna said that Grandma told him to come with her, leading them into her bedroom. They followed her. Grandma then grabbed a shell and some sage and lit it. She ended up smudging herself. Then she offered it to the girls, praying out loud the whole time as they smudged themselves. They were all shaking. The scratching and banging and cackling sounds continue outside, not just at the door, but all around the house. They all sat down. Grandma continued praying. Anna said at this point that she and her sister were crying, holding on to Grandma. She said it lasted about 4 hours. All the noises continue all night, as well as the cackling. Finally, Anna said that around 6 a.m., the sun began to rise. They could see it through the windows. Then, the sage was still burning. Anna said that Grandma told him to stay in the house. She was going to go outside. There was nothing. Silence. The sun was rising. The birds were beginning to sing. At this point, Anna was wondering if they had just imagined it. But then Grandma stepped outside, called the girls to come to them. Once on the porch, they could see the path where this thing dragged itself, all around the house and up to the door. Anna then said that her sister turned to look at the front door, and she gasped. There were claw marks covering the front door and sides of the house. Anna then asked Grandma what that thing was. Grandma said it was an evil spirit, very evil, and she said it's a good thing that it didn't touch them, because if it did, it makes you go insane. And so they ended up all going back inside the house to finally get some sleep. And this is why I don't go outside at night. If an evil spirit touches you, you end up getting sick and possibly die. This is a story that my mother and auntie told me when I was in high school. I always think about it, and I ponder over what happened. My grandfather passed close to a year ago in June of 2020. He was 96 when he died, and it caused some issues in my family. They don't really pertain to the story, but there are some things about him that I have to share in order to explain the story in the best way. You see, my grandfather, John, was a man who was extremely callous and old-fashioned. He was bitter, abusive, and a complete macho man. My mom was raised on never showing emotion or pain because of his abuse and lack of compassion for others. He was also extremely racist. He had many secrets in my family that are actually now coming to light after his death. Everything that happened around him was brushed off and forgotten because he had more important things to do, like drinking and having affairs. Just an overall intense and very no-nonsense type of man. He also wasn't religious at all, and he found things like fate and hope stupid. This happened sometime in the 70s, most likely early to mid-70s. My mom was born in 1965, and she remembers this story very clearly. but no one exactly remembers the year. One summer day, John decided to take his family on a small outing with the intent to have a picnic in the woods. My mom, her 3 sisters, and her mother, which is my grandmother, were all there, and very excited about this. Where we are from, my family is more than accustomed to the woods and has lived in this area for generations. Going into the woods for a fun family activity was nothing out of ordinary, and it seemed to be just another normal day. They made their way down a dirt backwoods road, and they stopped once they found a clearing large enough for them. As all the kids started jumping out of the car and messing around, just like kids do after being stuck together, my grandmother began unloading their food and picnic supplies. John began looking around the area and deciding where to set everything up. As he was doing that, something in the woods past the clearing caught his eye. Before going to see what was out there, he yelled to the family and said he would be right back. The kids and my grandmother didn't think too much of this, since they're all used to the woods, especially these. They continued unloading and setting everything up. One of the girls pointed out something in the clearing that caused a sudden shift from a normal day to something far worse. It was a dirt mound that looked like something was buried underneath it. This mound, it was about the size of a small person, maybe even the size of a child. It was too big to simply be any animal in these woods. There was nothing but squirrels and raccoons in the area. Scattered around the mound were big river rocks. There wasn't a pattern, but they were definitely placed on the mound intentionally. The dirt seemed to be fresh, as though just buried. It was loose and slightly darker than the area around it. The mood right away shifted from an average day in the woods to something much darker. My grandmother became concerned, and she told the girls to stay away from it. She was upset and worried about it, but she did her best to ignore it. The girls, all being children, they didn't have the same amount of worry and continued playing while just avoiding it. They tried to go back to their picnic, and the girls were already chasing each other in circles again. It was supposed to be a joyous, sunny day, and my grandmother wanted to keep it that way. Things seemed to return to normal for a beat. The trees around them created a wall of dense foliage, blocking their view from anything inside the forest. One of the girls again took notice of something strange. It was clear immediately what it was. Along one of the long branches of the tree hung a noose on it. It was tied with rope and hung high above their heads. A lump of dirt can be explained away by nature, but somebody must have placed this thing there. My grandmother stopped dead in her tracks when she first saw it. Something was wrong. Very wrong. They couldn't just pack up and leave. John was still out in the woods. Even children can recognize the noose as a symbol of death. And so the children started to become very anxious. Whatever innocence was keeping them from worrying about the mound had completely vanished. My grandmother, she tried soothing her children and told them it was just left by deer hunters, but she knew in her heart they needed to leave. No deer hunter would hang a deer and then bury it. At least no sane deer hunter. It wasn't until they started hearing something in the woods that they began to really panic. My grandmother, as well as all the children, began hearing some sort of chanting from deep in the woods. It sounded as though there was a group of people, all singing in deep voices to the beat of a drum. It went in a quick 3 steady beats followed by a pause, and then it would repeat. It sounded far away, but immediately fear began to take hold of each of them. They all listened and gathered together. As the seconds passed, it began to increase in volume. It was getting not just louder, but closer now. What started out as a distant echo soon began to engulf the entire clearing. My grandmother was terrified, and she wanted to leave, but John hadn't came back. They waited, fear-ridden, as the sound began to fill their chest. It felt like they were at a concert. It was everywhere and constant. almost like the sound was being made by the tree themselves. Suddenly, the sound of yelling broke through the constant drone of chanting. John's voice was yelling out to them from the trees. He yelled, "Get in the car." He came running out of the woods, yelling that they needed to go. They had never seen such fear on this man as they had at this moment. He was a man afraid of nothing, unbothered by the world around him. This was the most emotion any of them had ever seen from him. He saw something in those woods, something that shook his very being to the core. My grandmother began throwing everything back in the car as the kids got in as well. John and my grandmother picked up their things as quickly as possible and just threw everything in the car. They had no care for the things they were packing because of their fear. And the food was all over the trunk, and even some items got broken. After everything was tossed in, they all got in the car and drove away. This is where the main grunt of the story ends. But one thing from the story is what really has caused me to wonder all these years. My grandfather has refused to ever speak of what he saw. He never told any of the children, or even my grandmother. Every time this was brought up, he would just rebuff it and would tell them all angry not to ask again. He never went to the police or told somebody outside of the family. My grandfather is the only person who knows what happened that day. When I first heard the story, I swore to myself that I would ask him one day about it. But now I can't, and I do regret it. By the time that I was in high school, he had moved out of the state with some other family members, and I mostly lost contact with him outside of occasional happy birthday calls or even some letters. This story doesn't have an answer to go with it. When he died, the only thing I was sad about was never knowing what happened that day. We weren't close when I got older, and once I learned of all the abuse that he caused in my family, I separated myself from him. His death does loom over me, and the story still haunts me to this day. My mother just looked back on it as a spooky memory from their childhood. Nothing more than a story to scare the little ones at Thanksgiving with. I am one of the only people in the family who is still curious about what happened. I have always been interested in mysteries, the occult, horror, and conspiracy theories. And this story piqued my interest more than any others in my family. Which, by the way, this isn't the only strange story from my family, but it is definitely the most creepy. I do wish I had answers, but I don't have any. I do have possibilities of what happened, especially after I told a friend, and she told me that she is pretty sure that my grandpa felt the same feeling of fear that everyone else felt while they're in the car, except it was most likely stronger for him as he was much closer to the source of whatever he saw. Most likely the whole experience traumatized him enough as to never talk about it, and that by the way that I talk about him, he seems like the kind of person that doesn't believe in any of that stuff. So maybe he saw some kind of cult shit out there, and that it was maybe too much for him to handle. Also, she told me that I wouldn't have had much luck at trying to convince him to tell me the story, especially considering that I cut ties with him. Maybe Grandpa followed one of the people doing whatever they were. And the moment that he saw what they were doing, he possibly escaped and got all of us out of there. Another thing is, why didn't he just call the police? Well, the Pine Barrens have a spooky history itself, and it's said to have spirits in it as well, just like witches, and of course the Jersey Devil, which is why I've been leaning more towards that he possibly saw some kind of cult. I've never been much of a party person. I was always the type who quietly watched others indulge in their things from a distance. It's not to say I didn't have any things that I enjoy on my own, but mine were much more reserved. Still, I enjoy the company of others. I was well liked enough to be invited out numerous times by friends. This past New Year's Eve was no different. I had been working almost non-stop throughout the holidays leading up to the new year, to the point that I was starting to become a shell of my former self. My good friend Nate, who I spend a lot of time with through video games and the like, told me about an upcoming party that was being hosted for the new year. I sighed, which went through the speaker of my headset as I killed his character for the third time that match. Despite his losses, he persisted, insisting that getting me out of the house would be very therapeutic. I thought about it for a bit. It's not that I was against the idea of going to a party, just that the thought at that moment seemed tedious. After a few more moments of his constant invitations, I finally agreed. He assured me that I wouldn't regret it, and even if I did, it was just a single night. I agreed with his viewpoint, and I continued killing him on the video game. Well, New Year's Eve had finally arrived. I completed my early morning routine, which consisted of a shower and eating some breakfast. I had no work that day or the day after, so I just sat on my couch and flipped through the channels. Before I knew it, the sun was already beginning to go down in the sky. My phone vibrated on the coffee table. It was Nate. He was messaging me to let me know he was outside. I took one last deep breath before grabbing my phone and keys and heading out the door. As I hopped into Nate's car, he showed a large grin, even though I knew that was just how he looked. He often reminded me of a cheesy cartoon villain. Still, he greeted me, and we began driving. I did ask him previously where the party was, and he told me he wasn't really sure. I tried to take that response with a grain of optimism. After all, Nate didn't really steer me the wrong way before. As we drove, I asked again where our destination was. He told me it was on the other side of town, that some of his friends were having a big New Year's bash at a large house. My assumption was that it would be a few people getting together, sitting around a TV with maybe a few bottles of wine or something. However, when we pulled up to the house, I realized that wasn't the case. Rows upon rows of vehicles were parked along the driveway, spilling all the way onto the empty street nearby. Because of this, we had to park a fair distance away. We got out and made our way to the front door. As I stood there, I noticed how big the house was. It was a massive 2-story home that seemed very expensive. Nate knocked on the door and was greeted by a semi-drunken guy who shouted Nate's name and pulled him in for a hug. I had never met this person before, so I just nodded to him as he introduced me. The guy told us to come in, and I was nearly knocked back out by the loud people and music inside. There must have been at least 100 or so people inside the house. My friend and I squeezed through pockets of crowds, and we journeyed through the house. Nate greeted a few of his friends, and before long we found our way into the kitchen. Like I mentioned before, I actually enjoy the company of others, but this was a whole different level. After a few claustrophobic moments, I found myself standing in the back corner of the kitchen. It was then that I realized I had lost Nate in the midst of people, so I just stood there, looking like an awkward statue among strangers. At some point, someone handed me a beer, so I began to drink. As I was drinking, I let my mind wander. I did try to relax, to loosen up a bit despite all the noise and people around me. One drink turned into 2, and then those 2 turned into 7. I continued knocking back cup after cup, while just staying in the back corner of the kitchen. That was the last thing I remember of the party. Now here's where things took a turn for the worse. When my body came to consciousness, I wasn't sure if I was still asleep or not, even though I could feel that my body was awake and my eyes were open. All I could see around me was blackness. I sat up, and pain jolted throughout my head. I had a massive hangover, and I cursed myself for drinking so much. I touched around my pockets to try to find my phone. My wallet and keys were still with me, but my phone was nowhere to be found. just one of the many concerns that were growing at this point. I stood up and began to walk. A second later, I slammed my face directly into a wall. I recoiled and pressed my hands against it, wondering if I had fallen asleep in somebody's closet. I followed the wall, and that's when I realized that this was either a very large closet, or I was mistaken. I found the first corner and turned, continuing my staggered walk as my fingers traced along the walls. I tried to recall the events of the previous night. While I was thinking, my fingers touched something new, something that was different from the wall. It felt soft and also cold. That's when I noticed a faint sound coming from directly in front of me. It was somebody breathing. I was not alone in this place. When I pulled my hand back, whoever this was ended up grabbing me. Their hand gripped around my arm, squeezing tightly. Their fingers started to dig in so hard that I could feel my muscles shift against my bone. I shoved my shoulder into them and pushed them off me, freeing myself. I called out in a panic, asking who was in there with me, but I received no answer. I turned around and walked quickly with my arms outstretched, trying to find a door. My hands rested upon a wall as I looked for a doorknob. A few seconds later, my hand landed on a metal knob. I tried to turn it, but it was locked. Then I heard that same faint breathing sound again, only this time it was right behind my neck. I spun around, throwing my arms out. One swing went wide, while the other was able to connect with something. The mysterious person began grabbing at me, trying to restrain my arms. As they grabbed an arm, I slammed and kicked with my other limbs as hard as I could. Despite every impact, the person made no sound whatsoever. Summoning all the strength that I could, I pushed against them and heard them stumble backwards. I turned and began kicking the door hard. On about the fifth or sixth kick, the door ended up creaking before snapping open. I stumbled out and was blinded by bright sunlight. I realized I was in the middle of the woods. I turned and saw that the room I had escaped from was actually a shed. Then, I saw the figure standing in the darkened doorway. My blood turned to ice. Its body was incredibly thin, and nearly as tall as the doorway itself. Its hair was hanging in front of its face. Chunks of flesh were missing from its cheeks, revealing rotted, yet sharp teeth. Its sunken eyes stared directly into mine with intense coldness I had never seen before. I turned and fucking ran. I ran for nearly 20 minutes before exiting the woods and reaching a road. After walking for a few minutes, I saw a street sign that I didn't recognize, and a house nearby. I knocked on the door, and a large man answered. He refused to let me use his phone but agreed to call me a taxi. I waited at the end of the driveway, watching the woods closely. 20 minutes later, the cab got there and took me home. Once home, I called Nate from my house phone. He answered in a panic, asking me where the fuck I was. He told me he was trying to look for me at the party but couldn't find me. He said my phone had been found on the kitchen counter, identified by a sticker on the case. When he started asking around, no one knew who I was. I told Nate that I was fine, and I told him that I had fallen asleep outside. He chewed me out for being careless, and I shot back that he was the one who brought me there. We both laughed, and just for a split second, it helped me take my mind off what already happened. I thought about telling him the truth, or calling the police, but decided against it. What would I say? That a tall creature took me to a shed in the woods? I just want to forget this whole thing like a bad dream, but the questions won't stop echoing in my head. How did I end up in that shed? Did I wander outside drunk? Or did somebody put me there? And that thing, whatever it was, why did it stand there all night, watching me fucking sleep, without doing anything? Physically, I felt fine. I don't think it touched me. At least, not that I'm aware of. I'm at a loss. If any of you are planning on going to a party in the near future, be mindful of everything. You never know what could happen, or where you might end up at, if you're not careful. One of my friends told me that her dad and his two cousins were coming home from Rosebud back to Pine Ridge a few years ago. They were coming through Nebraska and were almost to a small town called Cody. As they were driving along and talking, they saw a hitchhiker ahead of them. They were in some old single cab truck, but they pulled over and asked where he was going. He was heading to Cody, so they offered him a ride. The man got in the back of the truck and they continued on their way. After about 10 minutes, they pulled into Cody. They stopped at the little close gas station and looked in the back. Their passenger was gone. Panicked at the fact that he may have fallen out, they spun around and went looking for him. They checked the whole 10 miles back to about where they picked him up, but there was no sign of him. Very spooked out, they decided to continue on. They turned around and drove back to Cody. None of them said anything. Right before they were about to get home, something knocked on the back of their window. The driver slammed on the brakes and everyone looked around. There was something, blacker than the night, and very tall, standing in the back of the truck. It knocked on the hood of the truck and got out. The man watched in fear as it walked away. The driver snapped out of it and threw the truck into gear. They basically flew the rest of the way home. When they stopped in Pine Ridge, they got out and checked the back of the truck. There was a spot where there was a dent in the bed of the truck where this person was sitting at. And there was also a dent the size of a mixing bowl on the top where it knocked on the roof. They never went back to Rosebud after that. So being from the res, or even being connected with it, we know so many people who have taken their own lives. Well, about a little over a year ago, a young woman from my mother's community committed suicide. As always, many people were reeling from the loss and posting messages of condolences and tributes. Then shortly after, another young woman did the same thing in the next community right over. Now, it's not a scary story, you can say, but if you want to share this, it's more of a warning. So both communities are now really feeling the loss. I was scrolling through the pictures and timelines of tagged memories, and also all the tributes, and I ended up coming across a video on TikTok where people were posting tributes of the young woman, including candle emojis, hearts, and prayer hands. I was skimming through the comments, and I saw where somebody posted a comment about how he knows it was an evil spirit lurking around in the communities, and it wasn't just depression. This ended up becoming a thread, and if you're familiar with TikTok, a thread can have about hundreds of comments. And on this thread, people were talking about it, arguing, debating, things such as, don't talk about it, it was the tall man, take this video down, repetition spreads it, I saw it once, standing by the trees, but I thought it was a shadow, it whispers in your head, it even sounds like your own thoughts. There were many comments like these. I continued scrolling, and the same person commented again, but this time he provided a picture, saying it was a sketch of this evil spirit. Many people were also commenting on it, saying that they had seen this very same thing, and saying stuff like, that's what I saw, or I thought I was the only one. Basically, they all said that he whispers evil things to people and encourages people to harm themselves. Others went as far as to say that this spirit thrives on environments like this: suicide, depression, despair, and it comes out to like feed on these people, or even encourages others to do terrible things. can't for the life of me remember who had posted this video, but I had saved it. And when I tried going back to the saved video, the person deleted it, including their own profile. But something I'll never forget is the sketches and the stuff that people were saying. Even I felt creeped out after reading all of that. And even those images stayed in my head longer than I wanted them to. I remember wishing that I had never came across that thread in the first place. Not saying it was just a coincidence, or maybe it was all in my head, but that same night, I had dreams about those sketches. The same shape that people had drawn and described. In my dreams it wasn't doing anything. It was just there, standing in the background, watching. After that, I remember telling a friend about it, and he didn't even ask me to see sketches or hear the details. He just told me to smudge myself and to be careful what I look at online and what I let my ears hear. He said some things don't need your attention because attention itself is an invitation. You keep looking, you keep listening, you repeat it, and you start to carry it with you. Whether this was real or all in my head, I'm not sure. But I do know that once I stopped talking about it, I stopped searching for it, and clear myself the way he told me to. Those images of that tall man stopped following me into my sleep. Y'all be safe. In my lovely little town of Pine Ridge, there used to be an old hospital, which was, of course, called the Old Hospital. Growing up, I would always hear about strange things that would go on in the old building. The building was said to be haunted, to the point where it was off limits to go into the basement at night. Some would go against warnings and come out with some scary experiences. One of my friends said that his grandma used to work in records when it went from a hospital to more of a government building. To accommodate the new desk and other necessary office supplies, the morgue was turned into a cubicle maze. One night, she had to work late, but she refused to be by herself, so one of the security guards agreed to sit with her in the office. The night went by quietly for the most part. It was around 8:30 p.m. when the guard suddenly was like, "Holy shit." She looked up from her paperwork, and she saw that he was staring at the wall. The wall where the body drawers had been converted to file cabinets. One of the drawers was slowly sliding open by itself. They both stared at the drawer when it stopped about halfway out. The security then gets up and walks over to it. He pushes the drawer back and closes the latch. He walks back to where he was sitting, but at this point they're both scared, just keeping an eye out. It then starts to open again, so the guard gets up. But when he does, it starts going back. It stops about an inch or two from being closed. The room is so quiet at this point that you could hear a pin drop. From the small opening, some noises start coming from it. It sounds like a dying animal, gurgling on a throat full of blood, and it was getting louder. The guard then jumps up and is like, "Time to clock out," and they both run out the door. As they're running up the stairs, they could hear the drawers slamming around behind them. The next morning, all of the drawers had been opened, but the files and all the papers were unharmed. The chairs that the guard and the woman had been sitting at had been thrown across the room, and the metal chair legs had been twisted and bent out of shape. I even left the job once because I heard they were going to put us in the basement of that old hospital. No thank you. I don't need anything catching a ride with me back home.
You should never help out a stranger at night on the res. A lesson that I learned a few decades ago. And now that I'm grown, I guess I'm ready to talk about it and share it with you. Growing up on the res, I saw it all. The struggles with drugs, alcohol, and the heartbreaking reality of suicide. People are just trying to make it out, trying to survive one day at a time. There are good people out here, some that will break bread with you, but there are so many out here filled with jealousy, anger, mental issues, and just all sorts of stuff. My family always taught me the same thing. Be nice to everyone because you never know what somebody is going through. And never judge a book by its cover. Always lend a hand where you can. Always help those in need, but be cautious. Don't let people take advantage of your kindness. The heart of people is evil. A lot of people say to follow your heart, but to be honest, the heart can be deceiving at times. Anyways, so this happened back in the 90s. It was a December evening. It wasn't completely dark yet, but it was getting close to it. It was also close to Christmas. If you celebrate Christmas, cool. But if you don't, that's fine too. At this time, I'm not even sure what we lean towards, but I do remember that we didn't do anything around those times. So my mom and I had gone to a quote-unquote Christmas party, where she was actually employed at this time. As we were driving home, about a mile away from the house, we saw a truck pulled over on the side of the road. Two men were struggling with what looked like a tarp in the back of the truck. It was flapping around in the wind, almost like it was about to fly away. As we passed by, they stopped what they were doing and stared at us, their faces hard to make out in the dim light. Something about it made me uneasy, but I just brushed it off. I remember when we pulled up to our home, I was about to get out of the car and my mom stopped me and told me to get the fire going while she brought in the stuff from the party. I walked in and the house was dark and cold. Our wood stove hadn't been going since we had been out all day. Back in the day, this was how many homes on the res stayed warm. Central heating wasn't common, and many people relied on wood stoves, not just for heat but for cooking as well. I would even say that nowadays there are still some places without running water or electricity. If you don't believe me, I dare you to go visit. As I was stacking the logs into the stove and struck a match, the fire came on quickly, crackling and popping as the warm air started to fill the room. I stood there for a moment, rubbing my hands together. Just then, I heard a knock at the door. My mom went to go look because she was going in and out of the home to get the stuff. When I went to see who it was, there stood two men asking for help. The taller man had a scarf wrapped around his mouth. You could still see his breath fogging in the cold, while the short guy was wearing a hoodie pulled up tight. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets. As soon as I looked at them, I recognized them. They were the same men we had seen earlier on the side of the road, the ones that were struggling with the tarp in the back of the truck. The taller guy looked at me and my mom. I remember the conversation we all had at the door, and now that I look back, it makes sense. But back then I was younger. I remember because something about them seemed off. The taller man greeted us. His voice was muffled by the scarf wrapped around his mouth. He explained that he had a busted tire down by the cattle guard, and he was wondering if we could help them switch it with a spare. I looked over at my mom. She asked where their truck was, and the man just gestured over his shoulder, saying it was just down the road. He did mention that they thought it might have been us who drove by a few minutes ago, and since it was getting dark soon, they figured that we might be able to help them. He assured us it wouldn't take long. He did say they had everything but just didn't have enough strength to lift the tire and such. By the way, I forgot to mention that they looked about, well, at least the one who was talking looked to be in his 60s. I did ask him what happened to the tire. I say this because I don't remember seeing a flat tire when we passed by them. However, like I said, it was getting dark, so I must have missed it. Anyways, he explained that they hit something on the road and their tire ended up tearing apart. The short guy just stood silently off to the side, avoiding eye contact with both me and my mom. He shuffled his feet in the snow, saying nothing, and it did get me a little bit nervous, even though I was trying to brush it off. You know how when someone is nervous and they are just glancing around? That was him. Let me just finish bringing everything in, and then I'll meet y'all there. The guy then said thanks, and they walked away. I turned to my mom and told her that I would be back in a bit. It wouldn't take long and it's just about switching the tire. She nodded and just told me to be safe. I then grabbed my jacket and followed the man down the road. The taller man walked ahead, while the short one was staying a bit behind him, his head down and his hands still in his pockets. He never did say a word, nor did he make eye contact with me, and something about him fell off. Even now, I never did see him again, or knew what he looked like. So we get to their truck, and sure enough, the tire was shredded to shit, almost like they had been driving on the rim for miles. The taller guy let out a nervous chuckle. He scratched the back of his head and said something about how bad it was. He was saying that they had been trying to make it before the tire gave out completely, but it didn't work out. But he didn't have to tell me. It was obvious from what I was looking at. I kneeled down to get a closer look. The shorter guy stayed back near the cab of the truck, still avoiding eye contact. I grabbed the jack and got to work. As I started lifting the truck, I glanced up at the taller guy, and I asked him where the spare was. He told me that it was in the back, underneath the tarp. I loosened the lug nuts and pulled the rim free. When I stood up to grab the spare, the taller guy moved quicker than I expected. He ducked into the bed of the truck and pulled the spare out from underneath the tarp himself. He then rolled it towards me. I got it and put it on. I started to tighten the bolts. I then looked up at him and told him that he should get this checked out after tonight, because it looked like it had been bad for a while. He simply nodded. The shorter guy just shuffled around the other side of the truck, kicking at the snow. I looked at him again, trying to break the awkward silence, and finally decided to say something to him. I asked him if he was alright. He froze for a second before nodding without looking at me. Weirdo. He mumbled something under his breath. I couldn't even understand him. I tightened the last bolt. I then grabbed the rim and tossed it into the back of the truck. That should do it, I said, wiping my hands on my jacket. The taller guy reached into his pocket, fumbling for a moment before pulling out $100 bill. He held it out to me and told me it was for helping them. I remember staring at this bill. $100 was a lot, way more than I expected for simply changing the tire. For a moment, I thought about it. Something about it didn't sit right with me, but I couldn't put my finger on it. The guy just stood there, his hand extended, waiting for me to take it. The short guy just stood silent, shuffling around the cab of the truck. I do remember telling him that I couldn't take it. The man then said something that, well, looking back on it, I will never forget what he said. You deserve this, for helping some old folks like this. Take it. You earned it, and everything that comes with it. I wish there was more people like you out here helping. You wouldn't even know how many people passed by and didn't even bother asking anything. Well, thank you. Y'all drive safe out there now. We will, the man said with a small grin. Climbing into the driver's seat, the short guy slipped into the passenger side without saying anything, never even looking towards me. I continued watching as they pulled away, their taillights still a bit visible. I stood there for a moment, staring down at the bill in my hand. I should have felt good about helping them, but something about the whole situation just felt weird. I shook it off and started walking back home. When I got back home, the house was already feeling a bit warmer. Mom had set everything up. The fire I had started earlier was crackling away. My mom asked me how it went. I told her everything went good as I kicked off my shoes. After some time, I was too tired to take a bath, so I just changed clothes and made my way to bed. I crawled under the covers and let the warmness of the blankets take over. I did fall asleep quickly, but it didn't last long. I woke up the next morning around 10. I never slept in like that, since I was a little kid. At first I thought it was just a cold, but then I realized I was completely covered in sweat. My stomach was turning, and my head was spinning. My entire body ached when I was trying to get up. It felt like I had the worst flu ever. I stumbled out of bed. I felt weak and confused. I made my way to my mom's room. I knocked and I told her that I didn't feel right. She opened the door and asked me what's wrong. I remember she placed a hand on my forehead and told me that I was burning up. I stammered, leaning against her door. She said something wasn't right, and she helped me sit down in the living room, looking around. She grabbed the phone and called my grandma, who is her mom, by the way. My grandma was a crystal gazer and a medicine woman. My grandma's role in our family went beyond the typical elder. She was someone who could see and understand things most people couldn't. She also had knowledge of traditional medicine. She was the one everyone turned to in our family when something unexplainable happened. So you guessed it. My grandma came over a few hours later. I was lying on the couch at this point, struggling to keep my eyes open. My mom explained what happened, and Grandma immediately started smudging. She started saying some prayers, and even waved an eagle feather over me as the smoke started to fill the room. She told me to hold still, and she said it might feel strange, but that she needed to draw everything out. I remember just laying there, barely able to move. The room felt heavy, almost like I was suffocating. In the middle of everything, I remember at some point she just paused and stared at me, like she had found something out. And that's when she asked me, "Who did you take money from? And why did you go out there alone?" The question hit me like a punch to my chest. My heart sank as I realized she knew what she was talking about. My mom, who had been watching quietly from the corner of the room, stepped next to her. I did struggle to speak, but I was able to say, "The two guys, the ones with the flat tire, one of them gave me $100 after I helped them." My mom's face drained of color. She turned to my grandma and explained to her what happened. She told them everything from when they came knocking, asking for help with their truck down by the cattle guard. But before my mom could continue explaining, Grandma's face just changed. She shook her head slowly. Then she said the most terrifying thing that's ever been said to me. She said, "Those were not any ordinary men. They were skinwalkers." And that's the last thing I remember before I blacked out. When I woke up a few hours later, I felt way better than before. I got up, still feeling a bit weak. I was in my room. Everything in my room was everywhere. I know why though. It must have been my mom and Grandma looking for that $100 bill. When I came out the room, they were waiting in the dining table. That's when my grandma finished explaining everything. Now this next part might sound a bit crazy, and I completely understand if you don't believe me, but that's up to you. There's no reason why I would lie about this. My grandma explained that those witches were on their way to take out an enemy from Sanders, Arizona. They were in such a hurry that their tire blew out. She also said it wasn't just two of them. She explained that there were 4 of them hiding underneath that tarp in the back of the truck. They were planning a surprise. If they had seen you as a threat, or if you refused to help, it would have taken your life without a second thought. They may have supernatural speed, but don't be stupid. They'll use vehicles and whatever they need to blend in and carry out their witching ways. If anything, these witches, they operate in the daylight as well, in order not to raise any suspicion. My grandma then turned her attention to the $100 bill I had taken from the strangers. She didn't touch it directly. Instead, she carefully grabbed a piece of cloth from her bag, wrapping the bill tightly. She said it's not just money, that it also carries their bad energy, their intentions. You can't let something like this stay in your own home. She tied the cloth and said a prayer before placing it into a small pouch. I didn't even ask what she planned to do with it, but I do remember her saying that you can't just throw these items away. The bad stuff it carries will linger, and it needs to be dealt with the correct way. Grandma said she was gonna burn it, or maybe bury it somewhere where it can avoid human contact, letting it just decay naturally. She did say to never be afraid of them. If you are, they will know. I know you might have questions, so I'm gonna try to address everything that people always ask me about them. If they were skinwalkers, why would they need a truck? Why didn't they just travel the way that they do? And to be honest, I don't have all the answers, but these are just assumptions. They may just not want to be seen. Maybe not all of them have the same ability to travel quickly like that. I'm thinking whoever they were after didn't come out so well. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, 6 skinwalkers on your tail. You gotta be screwed. Also, I guess the 4 in the back didn't know how to change a tire. I'm not sure. The fuck I know. All I know is that someone got a big knot on their head from where I tossed it. To be honest, I'm not sure they were targeting a specific person. I think they were just gonna target a whole community. Just remember, don't help out any strangers on the res at night. And I guess don't accept any gift. You don't know what it's been touched with. Just remember, witchcraft can be done with a touch. a stare, or simply a few words. Last year on Boxing Day, I found a really cool ornament in a clearance box. It had a built-in camera to record a unique perspective on your holiday celebrations. I grabbed the last one from the store's dusty shelf and brought it home for less than $10. I forgot about it until my wife, my 2 daughters, and I decorated the house earlier this month. I told my daughters about the camera and said that we could catch Santa in the act. I had an old costume in the attic, and I was going to deliver some gifts in full view of the camera on Christmas night. My girls were overjoyed and went back and forth trying to find the best place to put the ornament on the tree. They had no idea that Daddy was going to reposition it later so he could actually catch the living room and a good angle. In the nights leading up to Christmas, I turned the camera on to make sure everything was working. In the morning, I previewed the recordings, just long enough to confirm the thing was working. Satisfied, I put the micro SD card back into the ornament, and I also slipped in a new battery. I didn't want to disappoint the girls with a failed recording. We enjoyed Christmas Eve as a family, playing board games and eating way more junk food than there was room in our stomachs. Like we do every year, we let the girls open one gift from Mom and Dad before going to bed. The girls, still riding the sugar high, could still be heard giggling in their bedrooms from all the way up the stairs. From time to time, my wife and I could hear one of them shush the other, claiming that she heard noises on the roof or bells jingling. Eventually, the girls fell asleep. My wife kissed me on the cheek and headed to bed while I turned off all the lights. I retrieved the costume and tiptoed to the living room, getting ready for my big film debut. I did everything you would expect Santa to do. I ate most of the cookies. I drank the milk. I pat my large stomach and said my ho ho ho, and I dropped a few presents by the fireplace. All in full view of the camera. I know I did a pretty good acting job. On Christmas morning, the girls came running into our bedroom to wake us up. They insisted that we watch the video before opening the presents. I transferred the recording to my laptop. Then I got to the point where Santa showed up. My girls got excited and jumped in front of the screen, waving at Santa while obscuring the video from my view. It brought me so much joy to see how happy they were. I was too lazy to stop the video, so it continued to play in the background as we unwrapped the presents. I spotted a box I hadn't seen the night before. It was small and wrapped in blue foil paper that I didn't recognize. My name was on it, but my wife seemed as surprised as I was to see it there. Noticing that I was confused, my youngest daughter spoke. "Daddy, that's gotta be from Mr. Elf," she said. I was ready to dismiss her comment as just another weird thing that kids say, but my wife wasn't so quick to ignore it. "What elf?" she asked. My daughter pointed to the laptop. By then, the video had ended and all that was left on the screen was a preview of the first frame. "The one that came with Santa," she answered. Panic struck me. I know my wife didn't dress up as an elf. I scanned the video, clicking back and forth until I saw what my daughter had seen. There was someone in the living room. He walked into the corner after I had turned the lights off. He was standing there, watching me parade around as Santa. The video went completely quiet after that. It was as though the camera failed to record a single sound. The strange, tall man was wearing an elf costume, and he was standing perfectly still for over an hour, watching the camera from a distance. After some time, he walked over to the plate of cookies and bit the head off a gingerbread man. I glanced at the plate and saw his teeth mark on the cookie. The man then quietly approached the Christmas tree. I thought the audio wasn't working, but as he got closer to the tree, I began hearing his slow and steady breathing. He then reached out to the ornament, and the video stopped. In a terrified frenzy, I grabbed the blue box that he had left behind. I ripped the bow off of it and tossed it away. I removed the wrapping paper, opened the box and looked inside. Right there, in the middle of the bubble wrap, was the battery that I had put in the camera the night before. My wife took the ornament and opened the back. The battery was missing. I don't know what scares me more, what the camera caught, or what the elf might have done after he turned off the camera. Three days before Christmas, my grandparents arrived. We all went out for dinner, and it was a merry time all around. 2 days before Christmas, my sister and I went shopping for some last-minute gift for our little brother. As we were out and about, she couldn't resist making fun of me for not having a girlfriend for Christmas. At the food court, we ran into some mutual friends. We had a good chat and enjoyed ourselves. All in all, things were looking like a perfect holiday. On Christmas Eve, everyone was finally off work. My little brother wanted to play a few rounds of Super Street Fighter 4, while my sister stayed glued to her phone. She was playing Cut the Rope. That night, we all piled into the minivan to check out Christmas lights in the neighborhood. It was very fun, and the spirits were high. Next up was Christmas morning. My little brother played elf, passing out every gift to everyone. Everyone started tearing through their packages. Mom did get a pendant that she had been talking about. Dad got a new speaker system for his midlife crisis car, as we call it. My little brother got a stack of Xbox 360 games, and my sister got an iTunes card and a few games that she wanted. I had gotten the grandparents a Keurig coffee maker, since they never know what they want, and they seemed happy with it. When the unwrapping was done, I realized something. I hadn't unwrapped anything. Confused, I ended up asking, where are my presents at? The room went quiet like a train wreck in slow motion. My mom looked confused, and that's when the conversation took a sharp, awkward turn. What do you mean? What gifts? She asked. I stared at her, waiting for someone to say like this was all a gag. Instead, she turned to my dad. Honey, you did remember to buy something for him, right? What do you mean? You were gonna shop for him this year. The horror dawned on everyone. My little brother chimed in, laughing. Oh man, Santa forgot about you. While Mom and Dad started bickering, my sister, face beat red, wouldn't even look at me. Grandma and Grandpa got in on the action too. They started arguing over who was supposed to handle what. My little brother kept laughing until Mom screamed at him to stop. My sister just curled up on the couch, avoiding any eye contact with me. I sat there stunned, letting the chaos unfold around me. Eventually, I left the room. I didn't want to listen to everyone fighting. I went to my room. I grabbed the Lord of the Rings and started reading to drown out the shouting, and also my own heartbroken thoughts. A few hours later, I came out, hoping it was some sort of prank, but when I entered the living room, the conversation sputtered out again. No one could even look at me for so long. Mom tried to apologize, saying, "We'll go out tomorrow to get you something." But that wasn't the point, and she knew it. She walked away, shamefaced. The rest of the day was awkward. Dinner, every conversation. No one said sorry. No one even spoke to me unless I started saying something. That night, I stayed up late, messing around online, trying not to think about it. The day after Christmas, things didn't improve. My grandparents left early, cutting their visit short. My parents went back to work without saying goodbye. My sister and brother were both out with their friends. I stayed home, too heartbroken, or maybe too depressed to meet up with my own friends. There was no joke, no surprise. This Christmas, I had actually been forgotten. Now that we know that skinwalkers of the Navajo rest are just evil witches, what about the nahuales or lechuzas of Mexico? Old witches who happen to be shapeshifters as well. Evil people that use witchcraft to shapeshift and stuff. Well, I want to share something that happened to me and my family. I'm not from the rest, but I love the way you talk about different reservations in North America, especially from your own. I believe it's the Navajo res. Or is it the Pine Ridge Res? I can't remember which one you said you're from. So about the stories that you always talk about skinwalkers, and from what I have looked up, are simply medicine men, who as I understand were not always evil. They were good people, using their powers for the community, healers, people who heal basically, or curaderos, people of wisdom, right? You said they used to help their communities until something changed and they started practicing bad witchcraft, right? So when I heard that story, it reminded me of something that happened to my family in Mexico, and it's really strange how it resembles some of the stories that you talk about. I do hope you can share it with your listeners. My family comes from a place located between Michoacan and the state of Mexico. The town where I grew up with my 3 siblings is very small. My mom raised us alone because my dad left for the United States when I was still a baby, and he never came back. She worked for a time in a grocery store, but they had to close it because business wasn't good. While she worked there, she saved a bit of money. When she lost the job, she chose to invest in a few chickens to make sure we had food while she looked for another job. The chickens turned out to be a great investment. Not long after she bought them, they started laying eggs, and that became our main source of food. We did save a bunch of money like that, and we saved some eggs just in case things got worse. But we could find about 8 to 10 eggs in the yard every day. Since we didn't need so many eggs for ourselves, my mom decided to use some to raise chicks. She left the eggs with a few hens, and in a matter of weeks, most of them hatched into little chicks. They kept increasing. The chickens became hens, laying more eggs. Eventually, we had so many that we started selling them. We sold them to our neighbors. It was just to reduce the number of eggs in the house. But as time went on, people began coming to us to buy them. Without planning it, we had stumbled into a small business that had solved both our food and money issues. One afternoon, my mom's friend who lived in some other town a few miles away, she came to visit us. She told us that she was having health problems. She had lost her job and didn't have money to eat. My mom decided to help her, and she gave her a dozen of our eggs. A few weeks after this visit, strangers began coming to our house. They weren't from our town, but they were looking to buy some eggs. Looking at this as an opportunity to make even more money, we would sell the eggs. Over time, more and more people started doing this, but then something strange began to happen. These strangers weren't buying many eggs like they were always doing it. It shifted to them just buying just 1 or 2 at a time. Curious about why this was happening, we did start asking. Not exactly asking, but instead telling them things like, "Are you sure you don't want a dozen? You just want 1 or 2?" It was weird because these people were coming from out of town simply to buy just 1 or 2. My mom's friend came back to visit. She told us that after her last visit, she had gone to see Don Luis, a blind curandero, a healer in her community. He performed cleanses using eggs, which he would crack into a glass of water to see what was inside. Using this, he would diagnose sicknesses and prescribe remedies. She didn't have any eggs other than the ones that my mom had given her. She did use one of those for her cleanse. Don Luis was impressed by the quality of the egg's pattern. According to him, they were considered clean and really good for his practice. Don Luis would interpret the egg, combined with his treatment, completely healed her of any health issues that she was having. It happened within days. The word started to spread around Don Luis's town and all the surrounding area. People started to believe that the eggs from our chickens were good for cleanses. More and more people were coming to us, looking for these eggs to take to the curandero. At first, this was great for business. Every day we would sell plenty of eggs, mostly the people who needed them for Don Luis's cleanses. But then something happened again. Everything started from one day to the next. All the chickens stopped laying eggs. Many of them became sick, and some of them even died. My mom called a vet to come examine the chickens because she was worried. After checking, the vet found no signs of disease or contamination. He advised us to always change the water and ensure they were eating well. He even took samples for lab testing, which came back normal after a few days. Despite our efforts, the situation didn't improve. Some days, we would only find 1 or 2 eggs. Other days, we discovered dead chickens in the yard. Desperate, my mom's friend suggested that this wasn't normal. and she said that we should go visit Don Luis to see what he tells us. Listening to her, we saved the last 2 eggs we had, and we went out the next morning to see the curandero. The plan was to get there before people arrived to see him. However, when we arrived, we found a long line of about 20 or 30 people waiting. Great. After a few hours, it was finally our turn. Don Luis was staying in the small hut. Yes, it really was one. It was small and dimly lit, made of wooden boards and palm leaves. Inside, there was a smell that filled the air, and a bundle of leaves and herbs resting near an altar that he had. Don Luis himself was a man in his 60s or 80s. I'm not sure, but he had white hair. Despite being blind, he moved around and talked like he wasn't, if that makes sense. So my mom gave him one of the eggs. He performed a cleanse on her, passing the egg over her body. Then, he cracked the egg into a glass of water and looked at it. After about 30 minutes, I kid you not, it really was about 30 minutes, he just sat there in silence, breathing. To be honest, I found this pretty weird, but what do I know? After about 30 minutes, he finally spoke and said that everything wasn't directed to her, but at Don Luis himself. Unable to be harmed directly, the person who was responsible for everything going on had put a target on our family. Why? Well, we were the ones supplying the source of healing, you can say. He explained that a brujo, a witch had cursed our chickens to ruin our livelihood. It shocked us. He said that it's not that we did something wrong. It's just that there are evil people out there who practice evil witchcraft to curse people whom they are paid for. Don Luis then told us to keep our chickens indoors that night and not to leave the house until morning. He refused payment or anything. He simply said he was going to perform something to help us out. We went back home, and that night, we followed his advice. We kept all the remaining chickens inside, and we turned off all the lights as well. Later on that night, I did hear some strange noises outside. Curious, I peeked out the window and saw a large bird out in the yard. It was a white lechuza. For those who don't know, a lechuza is an owl. After a minute or two, it flew away, which made a sound that I will never forget. The sound of its wings flapping in the wind. It was a scary experience, to be honest. The next morning, we went to take our chickens outside. We found a line of white salt, or some sort of white powder surrounding our house. And guess what? From that day on, our chickens stopped dying, and they actually started laying eggs again. Everything started going back to normal. We eventually learned that a man from Don Luis's village had died. His funeral was closed to the public, and no one was allowed to see his body. Even though we never confirmed it, we suspected he was the brujo that was responsible for cursing our chickens. Years later, I heard stories that some healers, curanderos, are also believed to be nahuales, which are shapeshifters. I do often wonder if the lechuza that I saw, that owl, was actually Don Luis in some other form. Maybe he was protecting us. Our lives went back to normal after that. None of my siblings continued the egg business after my mom passed away a few years later. And we also never forgot what Don Luis did for us. That's my story of what I experienced in Mexico. I shared this because some of the stories of skinwalkers I have listened to, and the ones you have told on here, reminds me a lot of other similar stories that people often share down in Mexico. Everything seems to be sort of connected, interlaced. I'm sure a lot of this stuff was passed down from back in the day, when people would travel and share stories with one another, especially with different groups and tribes. All I know is, there's a whole different world out there when it comes to witchcraft. I had never been one to believe in the ghost stories that my Uncle Ralph told me. They were always long and drawn out, never straight to the point, and frankly, not very convincing. Growing up on the Appalachian Trail, he often warned me to be careful of what lurked in the shadows after dark. But being the person who needed to see something to believe it, I never paid much attention. That is, until last night. As I write this, safe and sound in the comfort of my own house, I hope that recounting the events of what happened will bring me some peace. But I know what I experienced will stay with me forever. It was a night that sent shivers down my spine and made me a firm believer in everything that my uncle had ever said about the woods. I had been visiting my uncle to pick up the deed to his home. He was growing sicker every day, and I knew I needed to act quickly. As I packed up the papers and got everything ready to leave, my uncle gave me a serious look. You know how these woods get after dark? They can be downright scary. I tried to brush off his concerns with a light-hearted laugh. "I have to get home, Uncle," I replied. "My mom is going to start to worry if I'm not back soon. Besides, it's not like anything's going to happen." But my uncle didn't seem convinced. "Let me give you some advice," he said. I nodded and he continued. "Don't look into the trees. If you see anything, don't acknowledge it. If you hear anything, don't turn around. Walk away and don't call out to it. And if you hear some sort of footsteps, don't run. You'll only make things worse." I mentally rolled my eyes as he was speaking. At that time, I didn't believe a single thing that came out of his mouth. I should have. "Thanks, Uncle. Trying to sound grateful. I'll keep that in mind." My uncle didn't seem to catch the hint that I was unwilling to stay for longer than I had to. "Why don't you stay the night? I can actually drive you," Uncle asked me with a hopeful look. But I shook my head no, and he continued on. "It's just I'm worried about you. I don't want anything to happen. I'll be fine. Plus, there's still some sunlight left. But if you keep talking, there won't be," I said with a lighthearted chuckle, hoping to ease the tension that my uncle had created when he dived into one of the stories that they said around town. It was common among the old folks who lived on the trail to be mesmerized by these kind of stories, some saying that they had seen something of their own, or had known someone who had been taken by the creatures that lived out there in the woods. "Be safe now. Remember, you're not out there alone, whether you like it or not," my uncle said as I descended the steps of his home. His words sent a shiver down my spine, but I quickly brushed it off, just hoping that I can get home soon and lay in the comfort of my bed. "Alright, bye, Uncle," and then began my journey, going into the woods not ready for what would come. "Everything is going to be fine," I said to myself. Half a mile into my walk, I started getting an eerie feeling on the back of my neck, the feeling that somebody was watching me. I brushed it off as some animal looking at me, maybe a deer, or maybe a rabbit, so I just kept walking. As I was walking, my shoe was sort of coming loose, and I had just noticed it now a mile into my walk back home. So I bent down to tie my shoe, going quicker than I should have, because I wanted to get out of here. It was getting darker by the minute, and my mom was going to start to worry, but because of me being clumsy, I stumbled and had to start again. "Damn it," I said quietly. My words must have set something off. As soon as I said that, the whistling began. It couldn't be the wind, because it was whistling a tune, one that I can't even describe. For a second I thought it was the crows, because they do have the ability to mimic. But I still took it upon myself to look around, completely forgetting about what my uncle had said. I regretted my actions, because in the dense trees and brush on the side of the trail was a lanky figure with some long limbs, watching me, with eyes that seemed as though they were glowing, and a big smile that looked almost human-like. I quickly finished off my shoes and got up. I brushed off whatever I saw and pinned it onto my uncle's words getting into my head and making me hallucinate. So I just continued my walk, even though the whistling continued, still assuming it was just the crows. It had been 2 miles now, and only half a mile left until I'm in the comfort of my bed, passed out from being exhausted. I was never the one to exercise, but living along the trail made me have to if I wanted to see my family members. That sensation that was on the back of my neck was still there. It seemed to have gotten stronger, but I was only focused on getting back home. At that moment, a scream echoed through the woods, piercing the silence of the night. It was not just any scream, but the sound of a woman in pain, frozen in fear. I didn't know what to do. The words of my uncle echoed in my head, telling me to ignore it, but the scream sounded too real to ignore. Feeling compelled to investigate, I called out, "Hello?" But that's when the screaming and whistling just stopped. A chill ran down my spine, and I started walking again, picking up the pace until I was almost jogging. However, my uncle's warning resurfaced in my mind, and I slowed down to a walking pace. There's only half a mile left, I thought to myself, trying to calm myself down. You're most likely just making things up and trying to scare yourself. I kept a safe walking pace and continued my trek home. Damn it, I think to myself, because now there's footsteps that sounded like someone was running, coming up behind me, and it was increasing fast. That's when I abandoned everything that my uncle had told me to do, and I ran. I ran as fast as my legs could take me, without looking back. Whatever was behind me was catching up. I still didn't look back. I just ran and I didn't think about anything besides running. That's when I feel some hot breath on my neck, and almost like it's burning through my skin, and something sharp digging into the back of my neck, causing me pain. That's when I started screaming and swinging, trying to fight it off. After that, I woke up covered in sweat. This whole thing was just a terrible nightmare. I am writing this still shaking. I have no idea how I ended up getting home. I was still half a mile away from it. I remember the last thing I wrote in the journal was that it was just a terrible nightmare. But I was wrong. When I woke up after writing it, I went to the bathroom, and all of a sudden I had the feeling to check the back of my neck. So I did, and there were some bright red claw marks on the back of my neck. I could have passed out then and there, but my uncle was coming over that day. He had forgotten to give me a document, so I figured I can just ask him about everything, even if it seemed like it was just a city dream, and my mind playing tricks on me. That's the only possible explanation to all of this. I then remember going back to bed. As I lay down, I swear, I saw that figure that was looming in the woods, in my closet, staring at me with those glowing red eyes and that same smile. A sense of dread washed over me. It began to move, slow, and I remember hearing its footsteps against the carpet until it was inches away from my face. Its face seemed to have been cut in half horizontally, and that's when another scream came. It sounded so loud it felt as though my eardrums were about to burst. The scream seemed to have gone on forever. Just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. That's when it disappeared, leaving me alone in the dark with nothing but the ringing in my ears. That night, my uncle came over, bringing the documents we needed in case something happened to him. He looked different this time that I saw him, almost very pale and skinnier. We were talking for a while, just about family and everything that's happened. It was an hour before sunset, and I didn't want my uncle driving through the woods alone. As my uncle got into his car, he turned to look at me. Then, at that moment, I swear, he had those eyes that reminded me of that creature that was in my room. I felt my blood run cold. Remember, you are never alone, my uncle said. At least, this thing that was supposed to be my uncle said. And that's when it simply just sped off. I stood there stunned, unsure of what to do, and what just happened. Was I still dreaming? Out of the corner of my eye, I can see some movement. This creature that had taken a hold of my uncle was now lurking in the shadows, looking at me. I grew up in a small town just north of Anchorage, Alaska. My family had moved there only a few months after I was born. My father was a very outdoorsman. He grew up very traditional. His father and grandfather took him hunting and fishing whenever they could. They would spend so much time outdoors. In fact, Going into town felt almost alien to them, or so my father liked to say. He grew up in Washington State, so he was already pretty much accustomed to the dense foliage that we live by today. Unlike his father or grandfather, who were both blue-collar men, he went to college and got a degree in engineering. In a job interview, he was so flustered by his nerves he couldn't seem to answer the questions correctly. He said it was a miracle that he even got the job. Of course, my mother likes to remind him of how awkward his interview was, as she's the only one that had interviewed him. My mother worked as a hiring manager for an engineering company in Washington. After a few years, my parents had gotten married, and a few more years after, I was well on the way. Their company was branching out to Alaska, and were asking for volunteers if anybody would be willing to relocate. My father jumped at the opportunity, much to my mother's surprise. They both made the trip, and after getting settled a few months later, I was born. Throughout most of my younger days, my father would always seem to find time to take me camping and fishing. Once I had gotten a little bit older, he began to take me hunting as well. I didn't really enjoy the act of hunting, but my father was so excited about bonding that I didn't have the heart to tell him. Years flew by, and every summer, it would be me and him trekking over mountains and through dense brush. For my 16th birthday, he and I spent an entire week out in the forest. It might not be the greatest birthday present for some of you, but that's what my family life consisted of, so it wasn't too bad. Sometime after my 18th birthday, my father had an unfortunate accident at work. He had a piece of sheet metal fall on him and injure his back. He was laid up in a hospital for almost a month, but thankfully wasn't in any danger. Once he was cleared to come home, he spent the majority of his time on the couch. His birthday was coming up soon. She asked me if I would be willing to go hunt something as a gift for my dad. I thought about it for a bit. While I hadn't gone hunting by myself before, I had gotten my license and knew all the procedures involved. I have also gone hunting almost every year since I was old enough to. I agreed and told my mom I would try to bring something back, but not to get her hopes up. She thanked me, and after a week or so, I had gotten everything that I needed. I packed up my truck, grabbed my rifle, and headed out. I drove about an hour and a half to our usual spot to begin our hunting. I hopped out of my truck, grabbed my pack, slung my rifle over my shoulder, and began walking. Some of you might be surprised to find that the summer months can be pretty warm in Alaska. I have met visitors who were under the impression that Alaska was a winter wonderland all year round. And while that may be the case for some of the parts in Alaska, like further up north, it's not always true further south. It was a clear, sunny day overhead, and so I pushed my way through the thick brush. It seemed like a million mosquitoes wanted to take me down before I even got started. As I hiked further inward, keeping a close eye on my surroundings, I started to feel as if every animal was aware of my presence. My father was a better tracker than I was. I was mostly a few steps behind him, always staying quiet. During my journey, however, I caught a few indications of wildlife nearby, but they had long since fled upon my arrival. Eventually, the bright sun overhead grew dimmer and dimmer as I kept walking. I knew it would be far too dark to hunt soon, so instead, I began searching for a spot to set up camp. After hiking for a few more minutes, I came across a flat area. It seemed like a good place to set up for the night. I unhooked my tent from my pack and began setting it up. Being a one-person tent, it didn't take very long. While I still had a little bit of daylight left, I gathered up some twigs and branches that I could and built myself a small fire just outside of my tent. Not necessarily for keeping warm, but more to keep the insects away. Once I had a fire going, I started to relax, sitting just outside of my tent, taking in my surroundings more intently. There is this feeling that is present when you're in the wilderness by yourself, of peace and quiet. On the other hand, there is also an ever-present danger as well. I try not to think of the latter as I got ready to go to sleep. About 3 hours after I had fallen asleep, I was awoken by a noise nearby. It was the cracking of twigs and the rustling of grass. I cracked an eye open, trying to remain as still as possible, but it was hard to discern what had caused the noise in the first place. I listened close as my sluggish mind became sharper. The faint noise grew louder and louder as it approached my tent. The smell of my campfire filled the air around me. I wondered if it was a bear, curiously wandering about. If that were the case, I didn't want to make any sudden movements. Either way, I waited for around 10 minutes, listening intently for any more sounds, but I didn't hear anything else. After a few more moments of silence, I began to get back into my sleeping bag, and I was once again on the edge of falling asleep. But then, another broken twig forced my eyes open again. I was just about to get up and poke my head outside of the tent when I heard something else. A voice in the darkness. It sounded like a child, a small boy, and it simply said, "Hello." Even though I wasn't moving, I felt my body tense up. Another step sounded outside of the tent, and the voice repeated once more, "Hello? Hello?" This time I noticed something very off-putting about the greeting, apart from the fact that there might have been a child in the middle of the Alaskan wilderness, in the middle of the night. The thing that was off-putting was that the hellos were perfectly identical, almost like it was a recording of some kind. When I heard it, I grabbed my rifle, which was lying next to me, and I gripped it tightly. After another moment, I could hear faint breathing coming from the other side of my tent. The voice sounded a third time, and when it did, I immediately sat up in my tent, trying to make as little noise as possible, and I readied my rifle at the direction of the voice. I could feel sweat beginning to drip down and sting my eyes as I tried to remain calm. I tried to think of a response to this voice, and I could only manage to say, "Who's there?" As soon as those words left my mouth, dark claws dug into my tent. The violent sound of tearing fabric filled the tent. Through the newly formed holes, I saw what was making that noise, and it definitely wasn't a child. Its skin was a darkened ash, and its eyes were a stark white. Its head was completely bald, but was covered in multiple pockmarks and scratches. A jaw hung slack with slime dripping from it. Upon seeing this thing, my brain only repeated one single word over and over again, a word which I hadn't used in fear since I was a child. Monster. My shaking hand squeezed the trigger, and a ring filled my ears. I couldn't hear anything, but I could see whatever it was stumble backward and collapse under the ground. As the ringing faded in and out, I could hear this thing coughing and wheezing violently. I scrambled to my feet and racked the bolt on my rifle as I forced my way out of what was left of my tent, ready to finish it off. But it was gone. I fearfully scanned the area, keeping my eyes peeled. There was no sign of the creature aside from a small pool of blood in the dirt nearby. I stepped back into my tent and gathered up everything as fast as I could, before quickly making my way back towards my truck. The thought of me not making it out of the woods alive crossed my mind plenty of times as I jogged. Lucky for me, after only an hour of moving through the woods, the faint light of the sun began cresting on the horizon. It was enough to make my journey back a little bit easier. I found my truck and drove out of the woods like a bat out of hell, and made it home soon after. When I got home, I told my mother that I had been unsuccessful in my hunting. She thanked me for trying regardless. My father chimed in from the couch, saying that it would have been different if he had been there. And that might have been true. Even though my father had been injured at his job, I take it as a blessing. A blessing that he won't be going hunting again for a very long time. As for me, well, I don't plan on ever going back into the Alaskan wilderness anytime soon. And if any of you out there are planning a trip, I would highly advise against it. There's something evil living out there in those woods. Something you don't ever want to see for yourself. My name is David Hernandez, and what I'm gonna share with you is the most terrifying experience I have ever lived. This story happened a few years ago. At that time, I lived in a place called San Jose Paso Nuevo, very close to the Cofre de Perote, in a very small town with only a few houses, and it's very quiet. Unfortunately, in this place, I lived through a terrifying experience, one that has to do with an encounter with a Nahual. For several months, many people began to report that their animals were disappearing. There was no logical explanation, because even animals disappear during the day. This was a very serious situation, because as I mentioned, it's a fairly poor area. Losing an animal means losing a lot of money. People gather in the classroom of Don Agustin, the oldest man in the town. They began to organize to deal with all this. Some people thought it was someone from a nearby community, intending to take the animals, while others thought it was a coyote from the area. Fed up with the situation, people started to stand guard at night near the pens to catch the culprit. The first few nights, the men who stood guard swear that something made them fall deeply asleep. When they woke up, they realized that the 2 pigs were missing. Angry and upset, they began to count the lost animals in the village, and realized that a total of 52 were missing. The most affected by the situation was a man by the name of Humberto. This man had lost about 35 animals from his property, which was near the town limits by the mountain. This led people to think that maybe it was some sort of predator from the Cofre de Perote attacking the poor animals. To confirm this theory, there was the testimony of Humberto's wife. The lady recounted that one night, she went out because she heard the dogs barking. She walked around carefully and realized that a strange creature was on top of the perimeter fence. This was unlikely because the fence was almost 3 meters high, but this animal was on top and seemed to be some sort of dog. When the lady approached it, the animal jumped and ran off into the darkness. The lady told the story to the people of the town, and her husband offered a large sum of money to whoever kills this beast. My family was always short of money, so I was one of those who volunteered to stand guard on his property. That night, at around 1:30 in the morning, we were watching the goat pen because it seemed that those animals were more like. The pen was made out of stone with adobe, and we were just behind it. Soon, some of our companions fell asleep, and we didn't know how it happened. We were talking and out of nowhere, they just fell asleep. Those of us who were awake began to hear a strange noise, and we decided to prepare the weapons because we had confirmed that it was just a coyote. Maybe this was the reason why everyone else fell asleep, because in my town, it is said that these animals have some kind of witchcraft power. We were getting ready to face one or maybe several coyotes, but we were not ready to face whatever it was that appeared before us. We heard heavy footsteps, and they were gradually getting closer. It was near, and that's when we saw it. A huge creature, gray in color. It was crouching just in front of the pen. I can't explain it. This animal was maybe about 1.5 meters tall in that position, and just when we thought that its size was incredible, we were in for another big surprise. The thing stood up, and its eyes were completely white. It had only one ear and a very slack jaw. Its fangs were visible, even more so with that ugly mouth, and it looked extremely thin with fairly short fur and claws about 10 or 15 centimeters long. We didn't know what to do, and we had heard stories of nahuales from our grandparents, but it had been years since such a creature had manifested in this area. I couldn't believe a single finger. I was paralyzed with fear, just like everybody else. It stared at us for about 5 minutes, and I swear, those minutes felt like hours. Suddenly, after being completely still, the creature began to move its head up and down. In a matter of seconds, it leaped into the pen, and that made us react, so we got ready to shoot it, but all of our guns jammed. This creature lifted 2 goats and ran off. We reacted a few seconds later and started the pursuit. We were guided by the sound emitted by the goats, and the creature was headed towards the Cofre de Perote. Some of us ran while others went on horseback. Obviously, the latter group got there first. They arrived where the trail disappeared, and we arrived about 30 minutes later. Those who were already there told us that the strange creature had entered a cave about 10 meters away. I don't think anyone in the town knew of its location, because if it weren't for this situation, we would have never found the cave. We were guarding the entrance, but nothing happened. Hours passed, and it was dawn when those who had gone on horseback returned for Mr. Humberto. They told him what happened the previous night, and the priest of the town came down to the cave around 8 in the morning. He was told about the events of the previous night, and the priest blessed the place. As soon as he started blessing the place, we began to hear a man crying. The priest told us not to be tricked by it. It was a trick from the Nahual. When the priest finished praying, that's when the loud screams joined by curses were heard. We ended up deciding to seal the entrance with rocks and place several protections that the town's priest gave us. We stood guard there for 2 more nights just to make sure that it didn't come out. And during that time, we heard the same howling several times. It seemed like an animal was trapped in the cave, and all we could hear was its desperate attempts to escape. A few days had passed, and a lady with a baby in her arms came looking for her husband. She was from a nearby town called Tonalco, and she said her husband hadn't come home for several days. The last time he left, he said he was going to San Jose Paso Nuevo to buy some animals. We didn't know what to tell her. We asked what her husband did, and she replied that he bought and sold animals. She confessed that their financial situation had improved only a few months ago because they were very poor. But since her husband started this business with a friend, things had been better for them. There was no doubt in anybody's mind that this man was the same Nahual that had been stealing the animals. We told the lady that we didn't know anything about her husband. Sadly, she returned to her town, and from that day on, weird things started happening in the town. During the night times, people would hear weird noises in the middle of the night in the streets. They said they would see strange black birds perched on the roofs of the houses, and a horrible smell of rotting flesh in the early hours. To make matters worse, many people returning from work late at night would claim to see a man dressed in black walking towards that cave. The priest said that the man was the same one who came to visit his son after having experienced all this. I eventually decided to move, for I became very afraid, and every night I dreamed of that creature that I saw. I ended up asking for help from a relative who lives in Costa Rica, and he kindly let me live with him. From here, I share my story with you, and I swear, it's not a joke. If you visit the town of San Jose Paso Nuevo, you can hear the same exact story from the mouth of many people. Jacob cursed as he pushed through the thick underbrush, trying to make his way to the tree stand he had built earlier in the summer. He was for sure that this location would give him a good sight to the neighboring field, in which he frequently saw large herds of deer. This was going to be his year, and he was sure of it. This is the year that I bring home my trophy buck, he told himself, as he recalled the events of the day so far. He had awakened at 4:30 a.m. He began to get ready for the long day in the woods, on the backside of his farm. His first order of business had been to locate and rescue his gloves and camouflage hunting gear from whatever undisclosed area of his home that his wife had hidden them. He was going to need them this morning to protect him from the bitter cold November morning. How could it be this cold, this early in the year? He wondered as he started to work on his second task of the day, which was to make a breakfast that would stick to his ribs long into the day. But he finally settled on toast, country ham, and scrambled eggs. He topped it all off with a large cup of coffee that had left a bitter aftertaste in his mouth. In fact, he could still taste it. After this, he packed himself a cheese sandwich for lunch. He grabbed his Remington hunting rifle, some coffee, and headed out the door. He loaded his gear into his truck and pulled out of the driveway and turned right into the one-lane blacktop road that led to the backside of his property. After about 2.25 miles, he turned right again. He had to travel about half a mile down that pitiful rut-filled excuse for a road when he came to his desired location. He then got out of his truck and loaded his gun and walked off into the woods. 10 minutes out of the truck and he was already cold, and it was made worse by the cloudy, overcast day and the wind that was blowing through the trees, making all the leaves rattle like dry bones. Oh well, he thought, it's gonna be a good day anyway, especially if I bring home a big one. Jacob took about 10 more steps when an uneasy feeling began to creep over him. He felt as though someone had stepped over his grave. He got the distinct feeling that he was being watched, but by whom? This was, after all, his property, and it was posted. No one had permission to be on his land. He had to be alone, but if he was alone, why couldn't he shake this eerie feeling that was scratching at the base of his skull? Something was off today. There was a silence in the forest. No birds, no insects, only the sound of the wind in the trees. Convincing himself that it was nothing more than a case of nerves, he continued to press on until he came to a clearing, not too far from his tree stand. Stepping into the clearing, Jacob saw the remains of what appeared to be a large deer, but he wasn't quite able to make out what he was seeing from this distance, because the sun wasn't completely up yet, and the forest was still covered in shadows. Jacob then walked closer to get a better look, and found that he had been correct. It was a deer, a large 8-point buck in fact. Looking at the remains, he felt a sense of dread come over him, and icy fingers dance along his spine. Something about this kill just didn't seem right. The throat was completely torn out, and the stomach was ripped open. Plus, also several of the internal organs were missing. This definitely wasn't a coyote kill, and no hunter would have done this. They would have taken the head to have it mounted. What could have done this, he wondered. A fear like nothing he had ever experienced before began to wash over him in waves. What is going on? He thought. At nearly 225 pounds and well over 6 foot, he wasn't one to give in to fear, but now he couldn't seem to calm down, and his heart was beating like a trip hammer. That feeling that he was being watched was getting stronger by the minute, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was moments away from a bad situation. He slowly started to back away from the mangled body and head back to his truck and back to safety. No more than 6 steps into his journey, his blood turned to ice in his veins, as a deep, guttural scream shattered the eerie silence and what was left of his courage. He had grown up on the farm all of his life and had been an experienced hunter since he was a child. He was familiar with every animal in the part of the state. Fear now gave way to stark terror as he chambered around into his Remington rifle and turned around only to find there was nothing behind him. His mind raced with confusion, and he was confronted with a million thoughts at once. What should I do? What could it be? Should I run? Am I gonna die? His survival sense kicking into overdrive. Jacob decided to continue on his previously contrived plan, which was to get to the truck and get out of there. Slowly and cautiously, he made his way toward the perceived salvation of his vehicle, silently praying every step of the way. With 300 yards separating him from his only avenue of escape, Jacob began to hear heavy footfalls off to his left. He could hear the crunching of withered leaves, sticks, and debris that littered the forest floor. Summoning every ounce of courage that remained within him, he forced himself to look in the direction of the noise. And that is when he saw the dark silhouette that followed him through the forest. Quickening his pace, he redoubled his efforts to reach the truck and get to a phone and call the sheriff, the game warden, or anyone that would listen. He couldn't tell what it was that was stalking him, but he could clearly see that it towered more than 7 feet and was incredibly massive. Jacob couldn't help but think that he was about to become a national statistic, a person who left home under normal circumstances and just disappeared without a trace. How many people, he wondered, go into the woods and just vanish, and the authorities just assume that they have become lost, injured, or been the victims of animal attacks, with their bodies never recovered. Please God, don't let that happen to me, he told himself as he drew closer and closer to his truck. 75 yards became 50, and 50 became 30, and 30 became 10. And like a miracle, he was back and opening his door. Throwing his rifle inside, he pulled himself up into the cab and started the engine and hit the gas. But the truck went nowhere. He had parked in a puddle of mud, and now the tires simply spun in place. Not now, he thought. I can't be stuck. Allowing himself a moment to think, Jacob remembered, this truck is a 4-wheel drive. There is no way I can be stuck, and was ready to punch the gas and leave this nightmare behind. Unfortunately for Jacob, some nightmares are not so easily left behind, and there is nothing worse than a nightmare you can't wake up from. And Jacob was about to learn that the hard way. Hearing something to his right, he turned and immediately wished that he had not. It took him maybe half a second to turn his head, but he would have given anything in the world to have that half second back, because it was the last moment that his world would ever see normal again. In that split second, his world changed. It was no longer a place where the world was light and safe, where he was just a husband and a dad and a guy that liked to go hunting and watch football on the weekends. That reality had evaporated away, and all that was left was a world where monsters existed and things really do go bump in the night. And now, an ambassador from that nightmare realm was standing just outside his passenger door, a visible reminder that his world had been turned upside down. Jacob screamed as he stared transfixed on this escapee from a horror movie. In his most terrifying, fevered dream, he couldn't have imagined that such a thing could exist. It was hideously ugly, easily standing 8 feet tall, with a thick, muscular body. There was just something about that face that was just wrong, almost like a mixture of a man and an animal experiment that had gone horribly wrong. It was the most terrifying thing he had ever seen. It was completely covered with thick, shaggy black hair that was matted in areas with God only knows what, and it walked on 2 legs, not on 4 legs, like you would expect from some kind of animal. What was this thing that had shattered his perception of reality? Was it a demon? Was it a werewolf? It can't be, he thought. Those things don't exist. But whatever it was staring at him, and it didn't look happy. The menacing juggernaut threw its enormous head back and let out a blood-curdling scream that resonated throughout the surrounding area and seemed to vibrate him to his very core. Shocked back into action, Jacob threw his truck into gear and took off as though he was being chased by the very hounds of hell. Jacob, with his mind racing, wondered what he was going to do. How will I ever feel safe on this farm again, he thought. Are my wife and children in danger? What and where did this thing come from? And will anyone believe me? The whirlwind of thoughts that swirled through Jacob's mind came to an immediate stop as he slammed on his brakes and nearly slid off the road. In a state of disbelief, Jacob sat staring at the large hackberry tree that laid across the dirt road and blocked his path, preventing him from reaching the black top and guarantee safety. How is this even possible? He thought. I just came down this road not even 30 minutes ago, and this path was clear. It was painfully obvious to Jacob that he had to get that tree moved if he was going to make it back home, since he didn't have a chain to pull the tree out of the road, nor did he have a saw with which he could cut up the unexpected barricade. He was left with a few options, one of which was walking, which he discounted immediately. The most logical course of action that he could come up with was to call for help. His best friend Kenny Patterson owned the farm just over from his. If he were home, he could bring a saw and cut the tree up for him. Jacob, with his nerves still frazzled and frayed, reached into his glove box and pulled out his cell phone and dialed Kenny's number. The phone rang 6 times, and Jacob was about to give up when Kenny answered the phone and said, "Hey ugly, what do you want this early in the morning?" As quickly as he could, he told the recent events to Kenny and said, "Please, hurry. I'm not kidding. There is something out here." Kenny, hearing the shakiness in his friend's voice, assured him that he would be there in a matter of minutes. Jacob thanked him and hanged up the phone and braced himself for what he was sure would be the longest few minutes of his life. Sitting motionless inside of his truck, every sound made his imagination run wild with fear. Even though little more than 3 minutes had passed since he had spoken to Kenny, it felt as if hours had passed. The clock seemed to be an eternity. Jacob frequently checked in all directions for any sign to see if this nightmarish monstrosity had pursued them. In every shadow that the forest and on this cloudy day produced, he thought he saw the shape of the black beast that had followed him out of the woods, and he was afraid that he would lose himself long before Kenny arrived to clear the tree out of his path. After what seemed like a lifetime, Jacob heard the sound of Kenny's old truck sputtering up the road, and in just moments, he was able to see the old red Chevy as it made its way closer to him. Jacob's spirits lifted when he saw his old friend, and a sense of relief washed over him as he realized that he was no longer alone. Stepping out of his truck, Jacob said, "Man, what took you so long? I told you to hurry." Kenny, with a surprised look on his face, "What are you talking about? You only called me 11 minutes ago. I think I made pretty good time." Jacob could hardly believe that only 11 minutes had passed. It had seemed so much longer. After apologizing to his friend and telling him exactly how happy he was to see him, both men walked over to the fallen tree and made a discovery that startled them both. The tree had not broken. It had not been cut. It had been pushed over and completely uprooted. All around the tree were large bipedal footprints that had a somewhat human appearance to them, but if they were human, the owner would require a size 28 shoe. Jacob and Kenny looked at each other, and then without a word, went to work on the tree. Kenny took a chainsaw from the bed of his truck and began to cut up the fallen blockade. Meanwhile, Jacob pulled the logs and debris from the road. Mission accomplished. Kenny put away his saw, and he and Jacob were about to get in their vehicles and leave. But before they could even open their doors, an ear-splitting scream erupted from the woods behind them. Jacob walked over to Kenny and whispered, "That's what I was telling you about. I don't know what that thing is, man, but it looks like some kind of monster. And I think we need to get out of here, now." Kenny looked as though the blood had drained completely out of his face, became very pale, as he said to Jacob, "Jacob, man, I never mentioned this to anyone before now, but over the last few months, that thing has been killing off a few of my cows. Their throats are usually torn out, and the bodies are mangled and broken. I didn't want anyone to accuse me of being crazy and making stuff up, so I never said anything about it. But that's the reason I rushed over here when you called. I actually heard that sound a few times off in the distance at night, but never this close. So I think you are right, old buddy. It's time to go." Cautiously and with a sense of urgency, Jacob and Kenny climbed into their vehicles and made their way back into the blacktop. Both vehicles then began the 2.5-mile trek that led back to Jacob's house so they could decide what course of action should be taken. Jacob could feel the temperature drop as snow began to gently fall. He then reached over and turned his wipers on as snow began to pelt the windshield harder. As he passed his neighbor, William Springer's farm, he noticed a herd of deer grazing in the field that bordered his own property. Having put a distance between himself and the nightmare he had just encountered, Jacob felt a renewed sense of security as his fatigued nerves began to calm down. Not willing to let this opportunity pass him by, Jacob turned on his hazard lights and pulled to the shoulder of the road and signaled Kenny to do the same. Kenny knew what Jacob was thinking as he pulled in behind him and turned his ignition off. Getting out of his truck, Kenny said, "What are you doing, man? We need to get out of here now." Jacob said, "I know, and we will. In just a minute, man. I just can't turn this down. I have to take the shot. That's a 6-point buck standing there. It's not the trophy that I wanted, but at least I won't end up going home empty-handed. And after what happened this morning, I think I deserve a little something good. Alright, just take the shot so we can go. I still don't feel right about this," Kenny said. Jacob steadied his rifle across the hood of his truck. He zeroed in on the buck and was getting ready to fire. That's when he heard Kenny make a gasping noise and whisper, "Oh my God, what is it, man? What's wrong with you?" "Raise your scope 3 inches, he said. Raising the scope, Jacob immediately saw what had been the cause of Kenny's alarm. Standing just outside the tree line in the edge of the field was the creature that they had left behind. Not even 5 minutes. Was this thing following them? Was it after the deer? What was it doing? Jacob watched the creature through his scope for a full 30 seconds before it even moved, and when it did, it ignored him and the deer and started to walk towards William's barn that was just about 500 yards from where the woodland demon had been standing. Jacob called out to Kenny and said, "Kenny, call William and tell him that there is something trying to get into his barn. I know he has livestock in there, and if that thing gets in it, it will kill all of them." Attempting to get rid of this monster, werewolf, wendigo, or whatever it was, Jacob fired a shot, but missed. The creature turned towards them and glared at them through red, hate-filled eyes, and then began to run towards them at full steam. Kenny, who was still on the phone with William, screamed at Jacob to get in his truck and go. Jacob did as he was told and Kenny followed right behind them. Starting their trucks, Jacob and Kenny both raced to Jacob's house, as though they were driving on the NASCAR circuit. Arriving at home, Jacob, gun in hand, ran inside to get a phone book so that they could call the game warden and the police and get some kind of animal control out there to get rid of this thing. Jacob had just stepped out of his front porch when they heard gunfire coming from over at William's place. Dropping the phone book and running back inside, Jacob grabbed his 12-gauge shotgun and some shells and handed them to Kenny, who took little time in loading it. Jacob and Kenny, now locked and loaded, walked together to their truck and got ready to mount up a rescue for their neighbor William. Simultaneously, both of them stopped in their tracks as a familiar but uneasy feeling crept over them, and Jacob's 2 German shepherds began to whimper and ran under the front porch to hide. Kenny, whose throat had gone dry as a bone, whispered to Jacob and said, "I have a really bad feeling about this." No sooner had the words escaped his lips, they heard a scream erupt from the forest off to their right, and the creature exploded from the trees in front of them. Until now, neither man had been able to fully appreciate the colossal size and scope of the beast, but standing less than 30 feet away from them, they were almost overcome by the sheer magnitude of it. Jacob had seen it up close earlier from his truck while sitting down, and had guessed the height at maybe 8 feet. But now, standing there, looking up, he could tell that this fellow was 8.5 or 9 feet tall, and would tip the scale at 800 to 1,000 pounds. It had inhuman long arms that were easily seen beneath its long shabby black hair, which covered it from head to toe. The chest was larger than a 55-gallon drum, and there was little doubt that it could have pulled the arms off an ape, and now it stood there, staring at them. Jacob and Kenny both opened fire without hesitation. The creature screamed with rage as the bullets tore into its massive body, knocking it to the ground, but not killing or seriously injuring it. Jacob and Kenny watched speechless as it crawled into the tree line, struggled to its feet, and limped away. Jacob ran back to the porch and grabbed the phone book and called the local game warden. Nearly 2 hours later, Gene, the local warden, showed up to take their statements and told them that he had been called out to answer numerous such reports in the area, but he wasn't sure what to make of all these reports. "Guys," he said, "I don't know what to tell you. There is no animal in this area, or any area for that matter that fits your description. I'm not saying I don't believe you, I just don't know what it is." Jacob, whose face was reddened with anger, said, "Come here. Here's the blood from where we shot it, and here are the footprints." A look of complete confusion washed over Gene's face, and he asked if they would care to go with him as he tried to track it. Jacob and Kenny agreed, but they said they weren't going without a gun. Gene stated that he planned to take his gun as well. All 3 men loaded their guns and set out following the tracks and droplets of blood that had fallen on the leaves. They followed the trail for about a mile, until arriving at a creek that was located deep in Jacob's woods, where the tracks that they were following were joined by others just like them. Some were smaller, but at least one set was larger. Deciding that the safest course of action would be to return home, they all went back to Jacob's. None of them gave up the idea of staying out in the woods longer, since there was now apparently more than one creature, and the cloudy overcast day made the forest seem even darker than it would normally be this time of day. Back at Jacob's, Gene informed them that there was nothing left that he could do but file it under an unknown animal sighting, which made both Kenny and Jacob anything but happy. Jacob and Kenny spent the next couple of days trying to warn their neighbors to use caution when they were out in the forest. Most of their friends just laughed at them and said they had most likely just seen a bear or something. No one believed them except William, who had also seen it himself the same day they had. He had even taken a shot at it, but missed. Jacob, William, and Kenny knew what they had seen, and they knew it was still out there. and they didn't care who believed them and who didn't. Over the next few weeks, more and more neighbors began to take the story a little more seriously, as family pets began to disappear, and other pets were found mangled. Other farms in the area began to find their cows and other livestock torn open, with their throats ripped out. Just a week after shooting the creature in his yard, Jacob's own German Shepherd was found dead, with its throat torn out, and it was hanging across a limb in a tree in his front yard. It almost seemed like a revenge killing. A few days later, one of William's new animals died the same way. Some people in the area still don't believe. They think the whole story was made up. But Jacob and Kenny know that there is still something out there in the forest. They still occasionally find tracks, or a slaughtered cow or goat. They still hear the blood-curdling screams off into the woods at night. They know that there is still something out there, watching and waiting, biding its time. Something cold and cunning and cruel. Something not human, with a taste for blood and revenge. My older sister, who is Irish, Italian, recently got married. Not her first, to this guy who is Navajo. Shortly after they settled down together, she has a boy from her first marriage. They invite me to hang out with them down on the reservation, where her new husband has a house and some property. I ended up bringing a few friends. Being a white guy, I know nothing about native or skinwalker lore. One of the friends that comes along, Gregory, however, is into horror and demons, things like that, and knows all these different werewolf, vampire, and even skinwalker stories. That first night, with not much else to do, we are out in the middle of a few 100,000 acres of hills and wooded land. We end up sitting around a small bonfire, with him telling us one story after the next. The next day we all take a walk to the elementary school to bring my nephew home. My sister usually picks him up, but she has some errands to run. Along the way we pass this scraggly looking dude sitting beneath this tree beside the road. He looks kind of old, but in a way that is difficult to say just how old. Regardless, it's definitely creepy the way he's watching us. His eyes kind of flat and dull, as if unaffected by the sunlight. As we make our way back from the school, my nephew seems pretty quiet and shy. When he sees this guy, he ducks behind me and starts tugging on my shirt. I ask him what's up, and without taking his eyes off the guy, he whispers, "I don't like that man. He's bad." The way he said it gives me chills, but I really don't think all that much more about it. Well, that night, Gregory and my other two friends, Jeff and Sarah, and I all head out to go check out this abandoned part of the reservation, which supposedly is haunted. We had been warned not to by my brother-in-law. He says it is an inhabited place of ghosts of the past and some kind of dark being. Of course, that only serves to make us want to go even more. So we dismiss his warnings and ghost stories, take the keys to my sister's SUV, and off we go. When we first get there, I have to admit, it is a lot spookier looking and feeling than any one of us had expected, consisting of only a handful of abandoned structures, most of the faded and grain wood, and the biggest of which is only 2 stories. It looks to me to have been some sort of mining town, like the kind that you see on westerns on TV. Anyways, just about every window is completely busted out, with only a shared appointed pane hanging here and there. There isn't a single door still in place, and definitely not an item of any value anywhere to be seen. In fact, there isn't much of anything at all. As we walk around, going up to and looking into some of the places, but not entering, Jeff takes us to telling us how this reminds him of one of his past flings with some girl. Sarah and I rolled our eyes, as we always do when he starts waxing old memories and then goes off a little ways, leaving him and Gregory together. We find a cozy corner out of sight and start getting comfortable, if you know what I mean. We are going at it for all 5 seconds when we both notice it has suddenly turned chill. Just as we huddle together for warmness, we hear a blood-curdling scream. We jump up and run back into the direction of the SUV and where we last saw Gregory and Jeff. There, they are facing the remains of the storefront, their eyes staring straight ahead and oblivious to the fact that we are there. Sarah and I both look to where they are staring, and we see this creature, that it is a wolf-like creature, but yet not being a wolf completely. I'm still not sure to this day if it was real or not. Either way, I for one am scared, as I have never been in my life. Its body is fully covered in hair, and it had these long wraith-like fingers, which end in thick curled nails, definitely claw-like. Its head is the worst though. Its eyes are just these 2 chunks of dark coal, flat, and emotionless. Its mouth is full of small daggers. I'm not sure how long we stand there frozen. Finally, it takes a step forward, and as if released from some spell, we bolt to the truck. Jeff and I jump into the front seat, he to the driver's side, and me in the passenger, while Gregory and Sarah go for the back. Jeff doesn't have his license, but at that point no one's arguing. The keys are in the ignition. He starts the SUV, floors the gas, and we speed off gravel and sand flying everywhere. I look out the window on my side, and then all around. I see nothing through the cloud of dust and the darkening twilight. When I turn to look back at Gregory, the only thing he could think to say is, "You got some lipstick on your chin." Just down the road some, Jeff slows the truck. By this time we are all laughing and making fun of each other for running away from shadows. Just then, a look of fright comes over Sarah's face, and without saying a word, she points a trembling finger out towards the trees along the side of the road. There, back in the dark of the trees, is where we see the shadow-like figure running just inside the tree line, as if it's keeping pace with us, and we all yell in unison to Jeff, and he again presses down on the gas. The SUV springs into life, but that thing, whatever it is, stays with us every inch of the way. It is only when we see the lights to my sister's porch that, making the turnoff to her. When we pull up to the house, my brother-in-law is out on the porch with this guy dressed in a long-sleeve button white shirt, blue jeans, and work boots. He later introduces himself as the local shaman. When we get up to the porch, the guy is in the middle of some kind of blessing. When he finishes, my brother-in-law simply turns to us and says, "Now you know, maybe next time you'll listen." Later, after the shaman leaves, he admonishes us, saying that by telling the Skinwalker stories, we put everyone out there in danger. He said just mentioning them can make them come and seek you out. Okay, so I've been a skeptic of creepy paranormal things my entire life. I have never believed in that type of stuff, but the things I have heard, witnessed, at my grandparents' farm shakes me to my core. My grandparents own a large plot of land in central Missouri, and they have owned that land for around 40 years. I've been to that farm over 10 times, and every time I go, I always get this terrifying feeling that something is watching me. Like, there's always something behind my back. I have also had many strange encounters there that are downright bizarre. My first encounter with whatever the hell this thing was when I was around the age of 7 or 9. I'm currently 14. We had brought our dog named Spot to that farm. He was a silver lab who I loved dearly. I was exploring the forest behind the house, just enjoying the summer breeze, when my dog started growling. A deep, sinister growl that I had never heard him make. I turned around quickly to see what he was growling at, but I couldn't see anything but forest among more forest, while my eyes were scanning the area of where my dog was growling. Some animal shot out of the brush so fast I could barely see what it was, and before I knew it, it was gone. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, absolutely flabbergasted by what I just witnessed. From what I could see of it, it looked like a coyote, but the speed at which it moved was absolutely insane. It moved like at 90 miles an hour and made almost no noise. But the most creepy part was that the place it jumped out of didn't even make an imprint of where it was laying. And from where I viewed it jumping up, I should have been able to easily see where it was hiding. Shocked by what I witnessed, I just decided that was enough and went back inside the house. My second encounter happened when I was around 10. I was visiting the place, and like usual, I was getting the feeling I was being watched. At first it was normal, and nothing really creepy happened. I was just spending quality time with family. But when night came, that's when shit started happening. I was trying to sleep in the twin bed that was shared by my mom's brother when he used to live there. That's when I heard tapping. Not tiny little taps, but loud tap. Almost like it was banging. It was coming from the direction of the window. I slowly sat up and looked at the window, but there was nothing. So I assumed it was just some animal or something like that. 5 minutes passed and no tapping, and I was drifting off to sleep when, this time, not a tap, a slam, a loud slam directly into the window. I'm not talking about like a hit. It sounded as if something absolutely massive hit the window. I shot up so quickly, I nearly passed out. I decided enough was enough and grabbed a flashlight in the drawer and shined it out the window. Nothing. 10 seconds passed. Nothing. I was about to go crawl into my mom's bed when I heard it. A screech. A screech that was not achievable by any human. So loud it pierced the quiet, peaceful summer night. I can't put into words what that sound sounded like, but it was dark and horrible, and I still remember it to this day. I froze, unable to move muscle. I was so scared. I was sitting there still as a statue, petrified by what I heard. That's when my instincts kicked in, and they told me to run into my mom's room, which I did. For some reason, I didn't wake her up. I just cuddled up next to her and didn't sleep the entire night. All I could think of was that sound, that horrific, terrible, bloody screech. My next encounter was when I was around the age of 13. I was back at my grandparents', just enjoying my time, like I always do when my grandpa suggested that we go deer watching. I agreed because I had been doing this since as long as I could remember. And it was never an issue, and it was extremely fun. So we took the Polaris, and we went around 6 to 7 p.m. to look for deer. We decided to go into the most eastern pasture, because that's usually where we spotted the most deer. 30 minutes passed, and we had seen a few deer, but not as much as we usually do. But then, this is where the shit begins. I get that feeling again, that dreadful feeling that something is there, in the shadows, watching me. But this time, it's a lot more intense. Like if it's right up behind me, but when I look, it's never there. But this time, it appears that my grandpa feels the same presence as me too. And just to let you all know, my grandpa is a very laid-back individual, always joking and having a laugh. The only time I've seen him be very serious is when my great-uncle died a couple of years ago. So when I started feeling that I'm being watched, my grandpa goes from a happy and laid-back expression to very serious and alert. He gripped the wheel so tight, his knuckles turned white, and he was just looking around like to make sure something wasn't following us. He then made a massive U-turn out of nowhere and started heading back to the house. I asked him, "What are you doing?" And he replied with, "We're heading back to the house." The tone of his voice was cold, like he had witnessed someone being murdered. At this point, he was gripping the wheel even harder and was absolutely going pedal to the metal full speed back to the house. I decided not to ask any questions until we got back to the house, which we did in no time at all. Once we were there, he rushed me into the house, checking his back to make sure something wasn't there. When we were inside, he closed and locked the door tight. His behavior was very alarming, and it really shocked me to my core. I then decided that all of the stuff I had witnessed was enough, and I only asked him one question: "What the hell is going on here?" When I said that, he looked at me and gave me a cold expression and said, "I have some things I need to explain to you." We then sat down for 30 minutes, and he explained that whatever this thing was, it was living on his property, and it has been here since the day he moved in, and he and my mother experienced the same thing that was happening to me the very first few years of living here. He explained that he has seen whatever this thing is, and it doesn't like new visitors. He told me about all the things he had witnessed and experienced, and they seemed to have been very pretty similar to what was happening to me. He told me that he knew this was going to happen to me, and that he was always watching to make sure I never got hurt, because he knew this creature better than anyone else. We talked some more, but all of it was the same. It was now late, and he decided that I couldn't sleep alone, so he had me sleep with my mom. We promptly left the next morning. I have not been back since that day. This last encounter isn't really an encounter. Two things have happened at my grandparents' farm. Recently, we brought my sister's horse to the farm. The first night for the horse was hell. My sister's horse has always been very friendly and not shy. But the first night of my sister's horse being at the farm was bizarre. The next morning, my grandpa woke up and was doing his usual chores and went to go feed the horse. He noticed that the horse was acting very weird, extremely shy and timid, but when he took a better look, he was shocked. The horse had 3 10-inch gashes down its side, like something had clawed at it. It was ruled out that the horse ran into the fence, but I think otherwise. Also, around the same time, my grandparents adopted a dog and named it Panda. Panda was a Jack Russell Terrier who was 2 months of age. 5 days later, he was found dead with deep puncture wounds on his body and with his neck slashed up. They said it was a bobcat or mountain lion, but I also think otherwise.